It seems that recently Chinese spies have been very active in Korea. In China, due to their domestic laws, even ordinary civilians of Chinese origin can be turned into spies. Today, let's take a look at some of China's espionage activities. There was a very big incident on August 10th. A Chinese man in his 60s, Mr. A, was arrested for illegally collecting radio communications between the control tower and fighter pilots at Gunsan Airport's military airfield in North Jeolla province.
This Chinese man, Mr. A, from April 2026, installed a one-way receiving device at a hotel about 1 kilometer from the airport and eavesdropped on fighter jet communications. Interestingly, Mr. A was a former member of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, although he is now retired.
He had no previous record of entering the country, but since January 2024 he entered several times. Surprisingly, during the police investigation, Mr. A claimed that he had a hobby of listening to civilian aircraft communications and wanted to listen to fighter pilot communications as well. Meanwhile, another Chinese man in his 40s, Mr. B, was also arrested by the police. He is suspected of gathering information about the training activities of the US military at Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek, Gyeonggi Province, where the US Forces Korea headquarters is located.
This Chinese man, Mr. B, is suspected of running a military supply store near the main gate of the U.S. military base from November 2021 to May 2026 and recruiting insiders to collect military secrets.
The police also believe that he is suspected of stealing military supplies from the U.S. military base and either selling them or brokering their sale through secondhand markets in China. In addition, it has been found that this Chinese man, Mr. B, provided money and valuables to a Korean woman, Miss C, who works at the U.S. military base, in exchange for military secrets. Very interestingly, this Chinese man, Mr. B, is also a former member of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. He is now retired. As you can see, there are cases where former Chinese military personnel are caught engaging in espionage activities in Korea. As you all know, China has been consistently conducting espionage activities against Korea since 2024. There have been several cases where people were caught taking photos with cameras near Air Force or naval bases, and there were also instances where drones were flown to film government office buildings. However, unfortunately, the two Chinese individuals who were caught by the police this time cannot be punished for espionage. The reason is that the amendment to the criminal law, which expands the definition of espionage to include not only North Korea but also foreign countries and similar organizations, was passed at a plenary session of the National Assembly in February, but it will only take effect starting from September 13. So the people who were caught this time cannot be punished for espionage. Instead, they have been arrested on charges of the general offense of aiding the enemy and violating the Military Base and Installation Protection Act. In fact, we need to be a bit cautious about Chinese individuals, and it's important to clearly understand the relationship between Chinese citizens and the Chinese government. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should suspect everyone just because they are Chinese nationals or automatically connect them to government activities. The key point is China's legal system. The issue is how much the legal framework allows the government to require cooperation from its citizens and companies for national security and intelligence activities. China enacted National Intelligence Law in 2017, and this law is one of the key pieces of legislation that supports China's national intelligence activities. If you look at Article 7 of the National Intelligence Law, it stipulates that all organizations and citizens must support and cooperate with national intelligence work in accordance with the law and must keep secrets related to national intelligence work. The important point here is that the obligation to cooperate is not only imposed on specific intelligence agency employees or public officials, but also on a much broader group, including organizations and citizens. Also, national intelligence agencies, in the process of carrying out intelligence work with related institutions and organizations. It is stipulated so that they can require necessary support and cooperation from citizens. This is not about asking for consent, but in reality, if the Chinese government gives instructions, they have to comply. So it is a structure where Chinese citizens inevitably have to cooperate in information gathering. Here, we also need to look at the Chinese Data Security Law enacted in 2021. Article 35 of the Data Security Law states that when relevant Chinese authorities collect data for purposes such as national security or criminal investigations according to the law, the relevant organizations or individuals are required to cooperate. Therefore, if the Chinese government requests specific data citing the need for national security or investigations, the key issue becomes how far a company or individual can refuse such a request. Also, for example, if a Chinese company operates telecommunications, platforms, or cloud services overseas, if they are running businesses such as e-commerce and have accumulated a significant amount of data, it is difficult to completely rule out the possibility that the Chinese government may request data provision for reasons of national security or public affairs. For companies, since they are subject to Chinese law, how to respond to government requests can become an important issue. Of course, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that just because of this, every Chinese person or Chinese company operating overseas is automatically mobilized for government activities. In fact, among Chinese nationals, there are far more people who live and work overseas without any connection to government activities. The important point is not the individual's nationality itself, but rather that China's laws and national intelligence system are structured in such a way that, if necessary, they can require citizens and companies to cooperate with national intelligence work. Therefore, for Korea, instead of treating all Chinese nationals as potential spies, the focus should be on monitoring where the information goes and who requested it when information gathering activities occur in sensitive areas such as military facilities, key national infrastructure, advanced technology, and other sensitive fields. It is important to thoroughly verify for what purpose the information was collected. Especially in situations like this recent case where a former member of the Chinese People's Liberation Army actually collected South Korean military information. It is necessary to strengthen counterintelligence capabilities based not on vague suspicions due to nationality, but on concrete actions and legal grounds. And when we think of a spy, we usually picture secret agents from movies, crossing borders under a hidden identity, stealing secret documents, and moving covertly under the orders of intelligence agencies. However, in reality, intelligence activities do not always take place in this way. On the contrary, it is entirely possible to gather information over a short period while maintaining a legal identity and engaging in everyday activities. Especially in modern intelligence activities, publicly available information can be a very important resource. By continuously collecting photos or videos posted on the internet, news reports, social media posts, and public materials from companies and organizations, it is possible to track the movements of certain facilities or organizations. When information obtained directly in the field or through people is added to this, it becomes possible to analyze details that are difficult to confirm with open sources alone. The problem is that each piece of information may not seem significant when it exists separately. Knowing the location of a specific military facility, confirming what equipment is being deployed, or identifying which department a particular commander has moved to, these are pieces of information that can sometimes be confirmed publicly. However, when this kind of data continues to accumulate over time, it can be used to analyze changes in activity patterns of the unit. That's why in modern counterintelligence, it's important not just to look at a single action, but to observe repeated behaviors. You need to look at things like whether someone has visited a particular facility multiple times, or whether they've consistently collected only certain types of information, or repeatedly contacted a specific person. This is also why in this case the police analyzed the suspect's cell phone and laptop.
Even actions that seem ordinary on their own can reveal the purpose and scope of information gathering when multiple records are connected. The fortunate thing is that now courts in our country have started to make quite strict judgments regarding foreign nationals collecting military information.
Especially looking at recent rulings, unlike in the past, it's no longer just a matter of imposing simple fines or light punishments on foreigners who photograph military facilities or collect military information. There are now increasing cases where the general crime of aiding the enemy under the Criminal Act are actively applied and actual prison sentences are handed down.
The most representative case is the ruling that came out last May at the Suwon District Court.
The court sentenced 2 Chinese nationals to prison for going around US-Korea military facilities and international airports in Korea, photographing fighter jets and control facilities, and attempting to intercept air traffic communications.
They were sentenced to 2 years in prison. Most importantly, this was the first case in Korea where the general crime of aiding the enemy under the Criminal Act was applied to foreigners and resulted in a guilty verdict.
The court also determined that the actions caused a serious threat to national security and stated that strict punishment was necessary. It didn't end there. Last June, the Busan District Court also recognized the general crime of aiding the enemy for a Chinese international student.
From 2023 to 2024, they repeatedly filmed the Busan Naval Operations Command and the US Navy aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt using Chinese-made drones and mobile phones.
Among them, the Chinese international student who played a leading role in the crime was sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in prison. In particular, the decision by the Busan District Court is worth paying close attention to. The court ruled that even if it was not confirmed that the footage was actually handed over to an enemy country, the general crime of aiding the enemy was established. The court's decision means that in addition to intent, it is not always necessary to prove a separate intention to provide military benefits to an enemy country for the general crime of aiding the enemy.
In other words, the act of filming military facilities and assets, which poses a risk to South Korea's military interests, was regarded as a very serious offense.
The reason why these rulings are important is that they show the judiciary standards regarding foreigners' access to and filming of military facilities are becoming much stricter. Especially in cases like this one, where information is repeatedly collected, or military assets are filmed near military facilities, it is quite significant that the court recognizes these actions as posing a real threat to national security. And now, the law itself is changing. Starting from September 13, the revised Criminal Act will be enforced, and the scope of the existing espionage law will be expanded to include foreign countries. If the existing espionage law targeted enemy states, now it allows for the punishment of espionage activities for foreign countries or organizations equivalent to them. However, the statutory penalty for these new provisions is not the same as the existing espionage law for enemy states, and it is set as fixed-term imprisonment of at least 3 years. The existing espionage law for enemy states still carries the death penalty, life imprisonment, or imprisonment for 7 years or more. Therefore, from now on, acts such as detecting, collecting, or delivering state secrets for foreign countries can be dealt with much more clearly under the law than before.